Okay, the time is now 7:01, and I'll call the meeting to order. Um, Adequate notice of tonight's meeting has been provided in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by the following methods: distribution of notice to the record, posting of the agenda on the school district website, and through Parents Square. Can everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Can we have roll call, please?
Ms. Choi, Mr. Grau, thank you. Dr. Meester, Ms. Molina, Mr. Park,
Here.
Mr. Zepka,
Here.
Mr. Sagal, Ms. Thompson, Vice President Melman, and President Lee.
Here.
We have a quorum for tonight's meeting.
Okay, thank you. Please note that Mr. Grau and both Mr. Grau and Ms. Melman contacted me before the meeting, and they both had personal conflicts tonight.
And also our acting superintendent of schools, Dr. Karamanos, and our three student reps are also present, with as well as our board attorney, Mr. LaPera.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to item 1.4, public comments regarding agenda items only. Anyone from the public wishing to speak, please step up to the podium, provide your name and address, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Yeah. Is there a microphone there for you?
So um, I would prefer to actually speak a little bit after the presentation, but many of us are here on account of the Gifted and Talented Program Audit, which we're very excited to see on the agenda. Xanthi knows that I have been barking up this tree for quite some time, and so finally seeing it on the table for discussion is really exciting. Maybe a couple of things just to sort of I know I have 2 minutes, so I did want to mention, without sounding too negative, that some of the confusion that you saw in the parent feedback part of the survey, I think especially from the elementary school parents, it's a little bit of an understatement to say it's just confusion about what's going on. It really was just like outright sort of like this feeling of, but there is no program. What are you even talking about? And some of that is, to be fair, Dr. Martinez, who's no longer here and cannot really defend herself, but she certainly kept a lot of us parents at bay. She also fed us a lot of smoke and mirrors about the program and its existence and how it was or was not in compliance with state law. And I just want to sort of represent that there's a level of distrust within the parent community as a result of a lot of those cumulative conversations. So there's a lot to discuss, I know, especially after the presentation. So just to be practical, a few things. One, we really would urge the board to consider including parents in a more ongoing manner, because we're really important stakeholders in this conversation, rather than feeling like we're just being sort of presented to at like cherry-picked moments. And it starts with even what's happening tonight, but doing it in a way that could be more expansive and more inclusive, so that more parents can be sort of dedicated to this conversation, asking questions, and really having a conversation about it rather than just being presented to. So if there's a way to host that conversation, I would really encourage the board to lead that discussion, because if not, I have a feeling the parents will be off on their own corners doing so. And I just don't think that that's as efficient as it can be. And I really would encourage you to think about, outside of this meeting, how we can have a more full and robust discussion about the program. Another couple of questions. The state requires there be a coordinator. It was actually something that was supposed to be filed as of like October of 2020. As the district's Gifted and Talented Program Coordinator, I'm curious if that happened, who it is, and if that can be shared. And then also I'm curious to hear at some point if the plan and the timeline that's been proposed in this presentation, if you feel that that's reasonable, especially given that there are very few tangible and actual student-facing results that we can see until 26, 27, which, as we all know, is more than like a year and a half from now. So we're curious to hear a little bit about your reaction to what's being proposed on the timeline.
Oh,
So-
Christine, did you give your name and address?
I did not.
Okay.
I'm Christine Kang. My address is 316 Moore Avenue in Leonia.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak? And we'll address your questions after the public portion. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak? No? Okay. Seeing no other comments, we will move on to board member comments, including responses to the questions. And I do appreciate your frank comments and sharing those with the board. Dr. Karamanos, I'll let you answer some of those questions.
Sure. So I'm actually going to hold off on answering some of those questions until we go through the presentation, because a lot of the information and the questions that you have will be in the presentation. We are looking at parent opportunities, like you'll see in the presentation, that there are parent opportunities throughout the process. The state coordinator that we do have was Dr. Martinez at the time. That was the last time we were monitored, which was in the last time we had to submit our report was when we were CUSAC monitored, which was last school year when Dr. Martinez was here. Now, the next time we go through CUSAC, we'll have to identify a new monitor, but you'll see also in the next few years, the Gifted and Talented program in general will be changing. So we will be identifying a different coordinator regardless. And then everything else, I think, yeah, Ms. Fuchsia will.
I mean, I think after the presentation, then we would like to have an open session for the public to be able to potentially ask some questions. I mean, the board, I'm sure, will have questions as well, but we would allow the public to ask questions about the presentation also.
And I think the last question was about how realistic is it, right? And the work that we did with Donna, I do think, and the conversation we had at Education Committee, we do want to be purposeful and realistic, right? We want to make sure that before we throw something at our teachers, that our teachers truly understand what gifted education means, what enrichment means. So we do have a timeline that we feel comfortable with, and the Education Committee has reviewed, that we feel comfortable with, and that is, we feel confident that the way we have this timeline set out, that things will go in that order.
Better? Yes. I was able to meet a few of you on Zoom at the Education Committee meeting, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet all of you. Thank you, Ms. Kay, for your comments. It's very important to have parent stakeholders, and I'm just going to start really by giving an introduction to myself. I think maybe it'll just breed some confidence in who I am and my background and work. Just a little bit about me. I recently retired after 28 years in public education. I started my career in the Wayne Township Public Schools as a gifted and talented teacher. Teaching was a second career for me. We had to revamp and repurpose our program. There was a successful program that is still in place today that I'm really proud of. And throughout my career, I worked as a teacher, a principal, a curriculum director, and I spent the last 8 years as the assistant superintendent. I worked with school districts around the state, helping just give guidance. It's really a passion of mine. Made numerous presentations at conferences about best practices for gifted and talented instruction. And there's a wide range of parameters and a lot that's up to the district to make determinations about. And I'll explain that and you'll have a better understanding. One thing I was able to glean is that as a board, you made this a priority. And as a community, this is something very important. And that was clearly recognized through your strategic planning and your district goal. In the presentation, I will go over the audit focus and priority statement. Priorities. We'll review your strategic plan, specifically what you said in there about gifted and talented instruction, and your district goal. So there is a commitment from the district to do this work. We'll talk about the law. I know that there were some questions there. Share the stakeholder feedback and input. We did 360 surveys. We asked board members, all instructional staff, and parents and guardians to participate and share their feedback. I came on site and conducted structured interviews with the administration from each building and some of the supervisors. We have a summary and recommendations and a suggested, again, I'll just emphasize that word, implementation timeline, because this is work, but what's nice is as you're doing the work, you're making enhancements along the way. And as someone who's worked in education a long time, timeline is really important because, as you know, our teachers are tasked with a lot and they're working with all of our students. There are so many needs, vast and varied. And the most important thing is professional development and having a realistic timeline so everyone can embrace, really understand the process and make small enhancements and growth along the way. So you just want to set up something that's reasonable and realistic, knowing that you have new teachers entering the system, you have people who go out on maternity leaves, you have a change even in administration. You see that all the time. And there are other goals and things that you're working on to strengthen your academic program. So taking it all into consideration, you just, and there's budgetary constraints also. It's something that you have to be well planned for. The audit focus and priorities were to evaluate the current gifted and talented program offerings at Anna C. Scott Elementary School, Leonia Middle School, and Leonia High School, assess the identification process and ensure equitable access for all learners, analyze the instructional strategies and differentiation that's occurring in the coursework and classes, audit the available program of studies at all levels, conduct surveys and interviews to gather input and feedback from all stakeholders, look at professional development and the sustainability, just knowing that you have to have an ongoing plan because otherwise sometimes the message loses its value. People may think this isn't a priority anymore. And people develop at a different rate. There may be other things happening in their classrooms that require attention. So it's really just being very reflective along the way and setting a practice and a timeline to ensure that it's ongoing and sustainable for everybody. And I'm here to also make recommendations that align with your district mission, statement, and strategic plan. Obviously, you're all aware of your board goal, but I just really think it's important to emphasize that the board committed to a goal by June 2025. The Board of Education will oversee and support the district's efforts to evaluate the current gifted and talented offerings and gain a better understanding of the current thinking around enrichment programs. The board will support determining a comprehensive program, identifying the path forward, and will support efforts to educate the community about the components of a quality enrichment program. So this was really nice to see. This was one of the first pieces of information presented to me. And when I got started with the audit, it's really taking a deep dive into the website, seeing what's there, what information is put out to the community, then looking at all of the stakeholder input and recognizing, as you said, that not every stakeholder engaged. But the message was pretty clear and I was able to summarize, and I think it was pretty consistent. The mission statement really reinforces, the district's responsibility and desire to inspire and motivate students, inspire best practices, and what's prioritized. AI is probably the best example. Just looking at how rapidly our world is changing, and we always need to consider what do the jobs of the future look like? What skills do those students need to come out of our high schools with? What are these post-secondary pathways look like? And starting all the way down in kindergarten, communication's one of those key skills that really prevails all the way through. What does that look like? How do you include it in everything you do? And how do we inspire and spark an interest from an early age? And that changes over time. So audits are really important. It's a best practice for districts. Over the years, you run a cycle. You may have a special ed program audit. You're doing a gifted and talented audit because things change. So this is the first step moving in the right direction. So I applaud you for that. And it demonstrates a commitment. It's very public. And, from then it's really you taking that information and saying, what steps can we take to move forward? How does this align with what we are doing? How does it align with our educational practices, the professional development time we have, and our budgetary resources? You could see there that there is a clear sentence about, making a positive difference in an increasingly complex and interconnected world, and making sure that programs are rigorous, that they encourage relevant learning in the humanities, arts, sciences, math, wellness, vocation, and technology, and that students learn to think critically, clearly, and creatively. And that's really in line in keeping with what I was just saying. So you're always looking at ways to, when you look at your curriculum, how can you enhance it? What resources can you bring in so that it's current and you're keeping students interested and it's relevant for future learning? Yeah, you mentioned the law. On January 13th, Governor Murphy signed the Strengthening Gifted and Talented Act, and it was really just codifying gifted and talented education. It defines students who are gifted and talented as those who possess or demonstrate high levels of ability in one or more content areas when compared to their chronological peers in the local district, and who require modification of their educational program if they are to achieve in accordance with their capabilities. This can look different in any district. So based on your website, not everything there is completely accurate, because obviously you have changes, you have fifth grade in your middle school, things have happened, and that was a big part of the audit. Let's look and refine what we have and make sure that we address all of this moving forward. But in terms of what you're required to do, you are meeting a compliance standard. So do I know that all those things are happening? I can't attest to that, but there is differentiation happening in the classrooms. Students are being assessed, students are being benchmarked. So you have all those compliance pieces in place, and gifted instruction can look different in each district, really just based on the student demographic. You have to look at your special ed population, you have to look at your multilingual learners, and you have to look at your resources. So it's not a requirement to have a dedicated teacher, a pull-out program. It is a requirement that curriculum is modified and differentiated so that students who show that they met the basic grade level standard are being challenged at their level. Just to give a very basic example, I'll use area and perimeter. So a student who is being instructed in fourth grade, that's a fourth grade standard, they'll be looking at squares, rectangles, and show how to calculate basic computation, area and perimeter. If a student demonstrates that they're able to do those calculations, there's no reason for them to do 25 problems. The teacher would differentiate and maybe have them do a few and then give them a real life application. We're building a garden. Maybe you give the measurements. Now we're going to build a fence that's 3 feet away on each side. We're going to build subplots and have them engage in a real life problem using those skills so that they're not doing basic computation. And the curriculum you have does allow for those modifications. So I don't know if it's happening in every classroom. I haven't visited every classroom. And again, it's best practice to do a curriculum audit, look through and say, where can we add in enhancements, where can we bolster curriculum, where can we add these real life applications? And that, again, changes from year to year. You have the benchmarks in place, and it's really taking the time to, I know your teachers are doing data dives and looking at all this data. There has been a very heavy emphasis in recent years on, since the pandemic, on any learning that was lost, intervention pieces, MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports, gifted and talented education is in there. And I feel like you're in keeping with the pace and the timeline. First, what is it that our students lost, making sure we're catching them up. And now, how are we making sure that we're really bolstering and meeting the needs? We're back where we need to be, but we want to enhance, grow, and expand. And just know that for students who can do more, we're offering those extensions for them. I'm going to share, these are broad strokes, so I took all of the survey information. You had, I think, a little over 86 participants in the survey data. And I felt like, as I said, the message was pretty consistent. So this was summarized, and I can share with the board all of the survey results if you were interested in seeing them. Board members appreciate the existing gifted and talented offerings, but seek more details, particularly at Anna C. Scott Elementary School. They recognize parental interests and areas for improvement. While satisfied with the Leonia Middle School's portfolio program, they request clarity on its application process, content areas, student challenges, and its exclusion from math. They commend the high school AP courses, academy programs, and student success, but advocate for staff training and exploration of model programs. Parents and guardians shared that there's widespread uncertainty and concern at the elementary level about whether the current program effectively identifies and supports gifted students. This highlights the need for better transparency, outreach, and a review of the identification practices to ensure consistency with the New Jersey state law, which requires clear identification of gifted and talented students and program implementation. Parents indicated that they are unclear about the program structure and would like to know more about a formalized G&T curriculum and teacher training. Parents want more rigorous math, science, reading, coursework, and hands-on learning experiences. Communication about the GT program also seems lacking, particularly regarding how G&T students' individual and specific learning needs are met. So I think that this echoed some of the sentiments that you shared. And this was the information summarized from the teachers. Teachers largely agree that Leonia lacks a dedicated gifted and talented program, with some questioning whether existing offerings like Global Citizens and portfolio classes truly serve G&T students. While portfolio classes provide added rigor, most feel the current model does not effectively meet gifted students' needs and that a clearer program structure, identification criteria, and professional development are necessary. Elementary teachers emphasize the need for more direction in program design, while middle school teachers suggested refining portfolio class selection process to ensure fair and appropriate placement. It seems through my discussions with the administrators over time, all classes weren't created equal. And that, again, with new teachers starting, teachers going, it seems like there is a lot of value in the program. There's tremendous pride for the program. There does seem to be a very clear identification process. I just think that the program needs to, and I'll share that in the recommendations, there's always room and a time for modernizing, rebranding, rebooting. It sends a very clear message to everyone, and we all roll up our sleeves and do the work. And then you have it moving forward. You have a blueprint. This is how we operate. This is how we instruct. And they have something to follow. They need something consistent. These are the insights that were shared from the structured interviews with the administration. The Anna C. Scott administration emphasizes the need for professional development on differentiation and instructional strategies for gifted and talented learners. They propose creating a structured identification process for gifted students and suggest embedding the Global Citizens program into social studies to free time for tiered interventions, including gifted and talented enrichment services, establishing a pull-out program for gifted students in grade 4 and enrichment centers for added rigor were also discussed. I know there's a newer administrator at Anna C. Scott. She was very enthusiastic and very eager to be involved in the process. The assistant principal who's there had the institutional knowledge and was very helpful in providing all that. So again, she's new and sees an opportunity for growth and enhancement and making change. And it's the perfect time. You have somebody who is really excited about this work. The Leonia Middle School principal and assistant principal, they were lovely to speak with. They talked about a very well-defined identification process for accelerated math and portfolio classes. There are tremendous offerings in terms of clubs, enrichment clubs and athletic programs. I think they could be better publicized. There's so much there. I wasn't able to find it on the website. This is why there was so much value in having these conversations. But it was uncovered that grades 5 and 6 do not have a defined program, and that's an area that needs attention. I know fifth grade resided here at one point. It was moved out. So again, it's a perfect time to look at the whole middle school scope and sequence, and look at how this can all be embedded and change. The high school principal highlighted the strength of the AP and Academy programs. The program of studies is very good and very comprehensive. The programs are fantastic. They're competitive and they're current. And what we just talked about was regularly updating the elective offerings, because the workforce trends do tend to change, and you have to be current with that. And even visiting other high schools, looking at top high schools across the state, and it's nice to sometimes just be able to have those dialogues and see what they're offering. And, in even considering, embedding student videos and things, there's things you could do to your program of studies to bring it to life. When people move into a community, they're looking online. So, again, there's a great program there, but you always look for ways to enhance and improve. Recommendations. So, transparency and communication is very important, and you have a passionate, involved parent community, which is so nice to see. Sometimes you go places where parents aren't involved at all. To me, it sends a message that you're very caring and interested in what your children are learning, and that's how you develop the best learners. We know they have the support from home. So parents who are requesting a better understanding. They would like to know about the G&T programs and the responsibility to meet the requirements of the code. I just want to emphasize again, you're not meeting the code. You're looking to improve based on what I was able to see in the conversations. You have differentiation in place, you have processes in place, but your community is really requesting a program where they know, and they want to know which students are identified. They want this on the website. How are they being identified? What does this matrix look like? Is there a cognitive skills test there? So there's nothing unreasonable about that. And that was, I think, one of the reasons that you moved ahead with an audit. That was, our first discussion and conversation. Again, the website needs to be updated, and I know you're moving ahead with a different website that was in the plan, so I was happy to hear that. And when you unveil a new website, there would be a dedicated gifted and talented page. The recommendation is to include a description at each level of what's offered, include the eligibility criteria. What does the identification process look like? There should be an appeals process in place so that you would have a designated person and you would know right there what are the performance expectations, because sometimes there needs to be exit criteria. You need to make sure it's a commitment on the part of the student as well. And just really understanding and distinguishing between gifted and talented and enrichment. Enrichment is something that is available to all students. We always want to spark an interest and motivate students to take part in other things. That could be arts. It could be just challenging themselves. There may be a concept, an idea, or a content area where they just have an interest, something that you can get them involved in so that you're enriching them and improving their outcomes. Gifted and talented is identifying students who are performing at a level above their peers. They're demonstrating that they have met the standard and should do something that's above and beyond that. They need to be challenged at their level. I use the word modernization and development. So this is an opportunity. It's a fresh opportunity to modernize your program and just think about ways that it can be developed to have more current projects, areas of interest, and things that your students are interested in. It's nice to survey students and have them and families, because there may be things that we can learn from you. It could be explorations. It may be, just even places that you visit, things that we learn about your families through this process that can be vetted. All of these standards can be adapted to almost anything. So when you're researching, you're exploring, you're creating, the best learning happens when kids research, synthesize, and then share with their peers. It's great for them to be able to learn from each other. So what I said was modernizing the elementary and middle school gifted and talented program to ensure all high-level ability students receive appropriate challenges to maximize achievement. It could be accomplished through a multi-year approach that includes staff training, curriculum development, community engagement, program development and enhancements, and website updates. So I think that we mentioned all of those things. At the elementary school level, we'd enhance the curriculum to ensure gifted and talented enrichment and acceleration opportunities are infused within the academic school day. I'm not insinuating that this isn't happening, but you go through and we look at everything to ensure that it's happening consistently across every class. We work, develop a clearly defined program. So again, that would be on the website. We would have parent information sessions. There does seem to be a strong desire to have a pull-out program. The principal mentioned starting in 4th grade. That is an optimal year because you have your standardized test data. It comes in from 3rd grade. Again, and that's at the discretion. I'm making recommendations, and with your superintendent, the board would have those discussions, and then you would decide how you wanted to proceed and move forward. And these are ideas, but it could be reworked a number of different ways. The global citizens period, that's time that can be repurposed and reused. They express an interest to have a clear scope and sequence with the sustainable development goals designated for each grade level. So it seems like there was an overlap, and there hasn't been a clear conversation where each grade should be assigned specific goals, and then they can develop projects, and that would become part of the curriculum, and they would know this is the scope and sequence. There was an overlap there. That can be embedded in the social studies period, and we would include critical thinking, problem solving, creativity and innovation, communication, collaboration, and information literacy. So any of these skills can be built into any of the projects you have. But you have this great program. They seem to value it. They seem to want to maintain it. You have a place to plug it in, and it just needs to be repurposed and redefined. That time could then be, if it's moved into social studies, reallocated to include a WIN period. That's an acronym for what I need. That period would be structured for tier services. So that can range from having reinforcement of skills. So anyone who, you may need a fix-it group, we need to practice, and it could also be enrichment, where you have centers, you have project-based learning, and you could have gifted and talented instruction where students can work independently with their peers. And this is all guided by the teachers. So on your website, it clearly says that there's differentiated instruction. You show a number of ways that this could be happening. So I don't know every way that it's happening. I know what I was able to read and then glean from the surveys and from the discussions that I had. Revitalize the middle school portfolio program. I would bolster the curriculum in grades 5 and 6 to ensure that gifted and talented 21st century learning and projects are infused. So you just want something clearly defined so that when you have those kids and they're showing mastery or that they have met or exceeded the standard, they may have benchmarks. It may just be a test. It may be them just, flexing in and out of things, but you want to make sure that those projects are available so that you're challenging them at their level. And students of different levels can also participate. They could do parts of things or they could participate at their level. I would redefine and relaunch the portfolio classes and really make sure that everybody understands the purpose, structure, and the branding so that it's aligned with best practices for gifted and talented instruction. Establish a program timeline, a scope and sequence that ensures consistency with rigorous coursework and projects and student expectations, and provide ongoing professional development and time for curriculum development and staff articulation and planning so that there's a clear vision of what the program looks like that everybody agrees with. And again, I know I said this earlier, but I'm reemphasizing refresher training and support should always be put in place, and I included that again because it's a commitment from the administration, from the board, because you have to allocate funds and there's only a certain number of designated days. So it's something that requires a lot of planning. High school, you have a great high school. There's tremendous satisfaction there, and parents seem to really be proud of the AP course offerings and the academy program. I looked at your performance reports. 72% of your high school seniors took at least one AP exam during high school, and 58% of those scored a 3 or higher on at least one exam. You have 15% who took 5 or more AP exams. It's very impressive. So the end result, whatever you're doing, you're getting them to the finish line, and they're doing very, very well. So that's impressive, and you should be applauded for that. It's tremendous work. And then one of the other things, I spent some time talking with the MLL supervisor, multilingual learners, and we talked about, Xanthia and I, special ed population, just making sure that access to advanced coursework is reviewed through an equity lens. So we remove barriers. At the high school level, there are a lot of prerequisite classes, and maybe some of those students didn't have the opportunity, but they shouldn't be precluded from taking the courses. They can do the work. So looking at how we can assess them differently and get them involved and included if they show that they can meet the demands and the rigor at that level. So here's a suggested timeline, and I know there were concerns, but I'm just going to reiterate. This takes planning and time. You know, it's April, the end of April. You're in budget season. I'm sorry, and most of your teachers are 10-month employees. So you really just have to be very mindful. You know, I know as a former administrator and teacher, you know, the hardest thing is when we overwhelm teachers. And the most important thing is when we provide them support, training in a way that's feasible and realistic. You want to set everybody up for success. It's overwhelming to set an expectation and then not have all the support and resources. So timing is everything. I'm going to move a little closer. My eyes aren't that good. So, you know what? I'll put on my glasses. Shadow. I had LASIK eye surgery many years ago. I think it's wearing off. That's good. So right now, really, we're preparing for 25 and 26. We started this conversation in the fall. I think we started the conversation. We met with the previous superintendent, and then we planned the audit, because that takes a lot of planning and visits and time for surveys. Then we reviewed the audit results, and it takes time to really read through and put everything together in a way that's authentic and truly reflective of your community. When you're getting in all of those comments, and you're trying to capture everything and put it in a concise paragraph, it's not so easy. But I really have to say, I truly do believe that captured in a very, very honest and true way. So the recommendation would really be at this point to start the summer. You always start with your administrators, because your leadership really needs to understand the mission and message, and work together, because again, they're the leaders of this building. They're setting an expectation for their learners, and they have their faculty meetings, they have their summer opening day time with them, and the message has to come from them with everything they do. And they just have to also ensure and breed confidence that they're in this with them. You have very spirited administrators who are passionate about this work. So I have no doubt that would happen successfully. But, they need to understand what the Strengthening Gifted and Talented Act says, what the requirements are, how to establish the best practice. It's something important. And, it's obvious that your community has expressed an interest in really doing this and going above and beyond and having a defined program. And I understand that. But again, that takes planning and preparation and budgeting. And then, setting up an instructional expectation. You use the Danielson observation tool. There is a whole lot in there about rigor and differentiating and meeting the needs, but really just starting with that and looking, this is what we have set as our expectation for what classroom instruction looks like, and having those discussions with teachers in a meaningful way and talking about what their practice looks like to ensure that it's being done, and providing support and training along the way. Even for teachers, your students are performing at different levels. Your teachers have different levels of expertise and experience, and there could be students who have different needs that occupy their time. So looking at the structure in every classroom to ensure that everybody could be successful, and it can be done. In the fall and throughout the winter, we talked about establishing a gifted and talented committee, and we talked about including parents, their stakeholders. So we would have representatives from all of your stakeholder groups, and again, that would be at the discretion of your administration, but that would be a best practice. And develop a common language for gifted and talented enrichment, gifted and talented instruction. Just learn about the cognitive assessments and how it is that you can develop a multiple measures identification matrix that the community is clear on. From what I can see from the website, it says you have benchmarks in place. Students are assessed a number of different ways, but really making sure that we have something clear. I usually like to use a minimal value matrices, so this way parents know there's a point value associated. And again, that would be determined by committee. How do we want to value standardized tests? How do we want to value the benchmark? That requires discussion and conversation and working together to develop. And then making sure people understand what that means and so that parents have an understanding of how we look at the full picture. And then, looking at district data. It's something that you already do. It's a best practice, but really looking, we're looking at students who are requiring intervention, who are not meeting the basic grade level standards. There are students who are very close. That's they may be meeting the grade level requirement, they're performing, meeting expectations, but they may be very close to exceeding. And if we add that rigor and we push them, that's the easiest group to move. But that's really looking at your data and saying, what are we doing to challenge them so that they will move over to exceeding expectations? Again, that's part of your data plan and part of the data-driven discussions that they have at the building level. I know it's something that's happening. I haven't been part of it, but just continuing those conversations and having them guided. Staff development, we talked about having professional development next year. So that would be throughout the year. Again, it's allocating time and planning for that to understand best practices, look at the curriculum and content areas so that you can see where enhancements can be made, and then just bolstering the curriculum, adding in new projects to make sure that you have that inquiry-based learning, and further developing the portfolio classes to bolster 21st century learning and ensuring that the academic rigor is there and students understand the expectations and it's consistent throughout all the portfolio classes. The spring of next year would be really preparing for a launch for 2027. So finalizing what the G&T program will look like. Will there be a pull-out program? Will there be a dedicated teacher? Looking at your internal resources. Very often there's a staff member, somebody, a technology teacher, a specialist. You have to be creative with schedules. These are tough times budgeting, and it's not so easy to just add an additional full-time employee. So looking at ways to reallocate some time for somebody who may have an interest or have the time in their schedule. Finalizing changes to the portfolio process and making sure that all that information is ready to go so teachers understand and it could be communicated to your community, and having that all clearly delineated on the website. Reviewing the high school student data and demographics for access to AP honors courses, and just strategies to improve so that through an equity lens, we had just talked about that, making sure that all students have access. Communicating all the changes to family. I know that is an important point of concern that was brought up, and updating the district website. Have an identification process. Very often, if you start a pull-out program, you would identify the students in the fall, and then you would launch in like October. You want to make sure you have all the standardized tests. You give parents an opportunity. You have a notification window. All of that would be communicated to parents, and an opportunity if parents had questions, wanted to meet, or there were any appeals to address all of that. And create a curriculum for any new GT program. So that's something that could be ongoing. You could, do a couple months, a couple projects at a time, and there would be a 2026, 27 implementation at Anna C. Scott. We'd have to implement the changes to the Leonia Middle School portfolio program, and staff development would be ongoing. And then, usually you go back to your community, you continue to survey them just to seek out information about overall parent satisfaction and engage the students. They can be part of your stakeholders so that you could have an understanding of the work that they're doing and how it's manifesting with them. That concludes this part of the presentation, the audit findings. And I don't know if you want to take questions now. If you have questions, whatever your format is, I'm happy to accommodate.
But I think we should start with taking questions from the board, and then we can open it up
Sure.
to the public.
Absolutely.
So, is there another part of the presentation, or?
No.
Okay, just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify. So if the board members, you can make your way back to your seats. I did have a quick question about, just in terms of on that last slide, you indicated that the recommendation is to start gifted and talented committees at ACS and LMS. Who is part of those committees? Is it just administrators and teachers? Or?
No, so I would have several committees. I would have a committee with all the administrators because you just want to establish the message and make sure. So we would start with the administrators this summer. And because you're a smaller district, I would involve most of them. And then there would be a committee at each level where you would have teachers who were involved. You would have the administrators of that building. You would have your assistant superintendent, curriculum supervisor. So that would be at the discretion of your superintendent. Typically you may invite education committee members to some of those meetings so that they can participate. And then you can have parent representatives at each level. So, it's important for them, so it may not be at every meeting. They wouldn't be part of developing the curriculum, but they should definitely be part of the conversation. That would be best practice.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. To open with that.
My pleasure.
Questions from other board members?
The interest is there. You have very strong administrators who had a lot of passion and a lot of heart for this work. I have no doubt they need the green light and some direction. It's not their area of expertise and they're running buildings, but they were very clear that they wanted to be part of the process, which is very important and nice to see.
Good. Okay. Oh. I echo. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. I have one question. So gifted and talented, the spirit of gifted and talented, is it really geared towards academic excellence at the end, or are we envisioning more than that, a broader and beyond? Because I can
Broader and beyond.
Beyond?
So
Okay.
I'll just give an example. I'm working with the Weehawken schools. I sent the superintendent a video today. We did a whole class project in 5th grade. So we engaged them in a marketing and branding project for chocolate chip cookies. They had to come up with their brand. They had to come up with a campaign. They used AI to generate a song, but they exceeded my expectation. I went in to see the presentations and they used Canva and some of them created merchandise and they had digital overlays on their Canva slides because some of them are really artistic. But we had a student who, some of them sang, they were able to put in their own voice, but a student who sang his whole song and he had the whole class, he created a beat because he's musically talented and had the whole class participate. So it's better through an example just so you can see, but you really want to tap into all their gifts and talents and enrich them. So that's part of your enrichment, building a school-wide enrichment model. You don't want to exclude anyone. And that's why we had the conversation at Anna C. Scott about having enrichment centers and really distinguishing, because enrichment is for everybody and ensuring that everyone, you want to encourage and motivate and get everyone involved in higher level thinking. Textbook can be very boring sometimes. So when they can engage in a game where they're using, their skills and their thought processes, and sometimes a little competition's good. those are really great ways to enhance and get students involved who may have been less interested academically before. Sure.
So that sounds like, so we talked about AP. So AP exams are strictly academics, right?
Yes.
So maybe for high school, then we have academies.
You have your academy
That's
programs.
more for GNT. Is we're talking.
You know what? Both. So if you look at high school G&T, it's your AP and your academies because there are students who showed specific interest in a content area and exploring that pathway. And then your dual enrollment classes, it could be looked at under a number of different lenses. They all qualify as G&T.
Ask you one more follow-up. So is it natural to, so the example you just talked about for fifth grader, that is, it's almost like boundary, there's no boundary.
Well,
Right?
you have to,
no,
so you have to really train the teacher so that they understand.
Right, I'm sorry.
Because
I started off with the wrong
because they also
statement.
have to maintain, you have to maintain a pace. They have a responsibility to teach the whole curriculum. And so when you build in these projects, you have to make sure that they're aligned with standards. You sure that you're measuring all the standards, and then you're giving students an opportunity to extend and go beyond. So it's distinguishing between what's an enrichment project to enhance the instruction. And that's why we talked about that win period, making sure students get what they need.
So so what we're envisioning is like our, for instance, portfolio classes in middle school. For math, I can't speak for all portfolio classes. I haven't sitting in them themselves myself, but like math, as far as I know, it's
Math is accelerated. So those are, it's more of an
okay,
honor.
so they are different.
So
Okay.
math and portfolio is different. And that's something when I talked about modernizing and rebranding, I would probably recommend that we called it like it had an honors math track because it's very different from the portfolio.
I thought it was different. That's
And,
why I brought it up.
Yes, it's different. The identification's different. So again, that's all part of your branding. You're modernizing and you're having clear descriptions on your website and sitting down with the administration because there is a clear defined process. And they were able to speak very articulately and eloquently. So I know it was authentic. You can tell when it's really happening. Your middle school principal and assistant principal, they were able to talk for, it was like very streamlined and it was coming from years of expertise. He's been doing this for a long time. So it seems more like the portfolio. We have to address fifth and sixth, and then just having new staff and really having it defined in the curriculum so that everybody has access to the same projects and ideas, and it's part of the discussion.
I have a quick question. I know this may be subjective, but rebranding. How do you rebrand it when you're not excluding other people? We're saying these kids are all honors and you guys are just
So
regular
when I
kids.
say rebranding, it's a website refresh. And then you have all kinds of clubs. Remember, I said that they weren't well publicized. You have things offered for everyone. And also in all of your classes, there's always an opportunity for students to be enriched, for them to have an extended standard. They can have project-based learning. So having those discussions with teachers and then really looking at how this is all communicated to the teachers and to your parents so everybody understands what education looks like. And again, enrichment is for everyone. And there are lots of enrichment opportunities. I just don't think everyone is, or I couldn't see it on the website. That should be part of your website.
Yeah, I think that when I first time you hear about like a new rebranding of this GNT program is that it's not like all about the students' achievement. So such thing as like right now a lot of public as well as the board members kind of confused about the currently honor classes equivalent to the GNT classes. But I'm like these GNT versus these honor classes or like these advanced classes. It's kind of like my understanding was is separate. So it's more of happen to be those GNT.
Communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Transparency and
Right.
communication.
Exactly. So that a lot of parents think that GNT education is about, their grade, their kids' grade, and then what type of class they're taking it. but I think that's totally miscommunication and confusion about it. It's a GNT program. As far as I see it, is more opportunities and more. For example, so we're currently we have the portfolio classes. We have math, English, but then art classes. Such as art classes, that doesn't has to be necessarily to be like they're like they're great at art, but nothing to do with like their academics or like their math or English. So it's more like it's more about like opportunities, not about like that there are students' grades and going better school. It's totally different from that. So that's just something that like what we should aware of it, and the public should aware of it as well too.
Yeah, so then you'll get more student interest, although there is a lot of student participation. I just don't think it's clear to the public because it's hard to glean all of that by going on the website. And it needs to be a defined page where you can click on a middle school tab and see everything that's there.
So, one other thing. So besides the rebranding and everything, you're saying the opportunities is probably 4th, 5th, and 6th to really install something that's missing, right?
I mean, that, so, that came from my discussions. The principal mentioned 4th grade as a launching point. There are, and we would talk about this moving ahead. We could do training with all grade levels, so that starting in 1st grade, it could happen in the classroom. It's so that teachers understand how to meet the needs of all their students. So in 1st grade, you may have students who come in who are beginning readers. You may have students who come in who are at end of 2nd grade reading levels. So typically you have guided reading groups and you're having them read books at their level. Just ensuring that everyone is being challenged at their level. And, it can look different from district to district. And that would just be taking a deeper dive, knowing you can't do everything at once, but most of those things are happening. And it's making sure that teachers are trained and they have an understanding and just know what the expectation is, and that they have all the tools and resources there to do it. But it did seem like there is a very strong desire to have a dedicated pull-out program. And 4th grade would be a great launching point. The kids are a little older, they can be involved in more. So, again, that's a recommendation, and that would be an ongoing discussion.
And we definitely want to look at all grade levels, especially at the elementary level, because we want our teachers to be able to, when they have kids in front of them, be able to identify behaviors of gifted students from very early on. So even though we might not have a pre-K pull-out program, when there is a pre-K student in that class, a teacher can say, oh, I'm seeing behaviors, and can articulate those behaviors to our MTSS teams that we've established. That we've been focusing a lot on our remedial work with MTSS. And now, as we've talked about as a board, it's time to think about how we bring in our gifted work into that MTSS process. So that's the importance of seeing and training all of our staff.
I'm also curious, this is relatively new mandate. Are there mature enough examples that we can look up to within state of New Jersey? Like role models or, success story, even for training? Is there like a robust like training programs and resources that we can have our administrator and staff to go to?
There are districts, if there was a decision made to make some visits to see different types of programs. There are also opportunities for for staff, for teachers who are working with gifted and talented students to come together. One of the things that I do as part of my work is that I invite teachers so I'm running something down in the Jersey Shore. So they're smaller districts. So we have teachers coming from all of those districts. And it's, so they'll be doing professional development with me, but they do a make and take where they bring examples. So yes, if there was an interest in getting involved in that type of work, that's available. But again, setting up a timeline and starting with your administration, having the board make a decision to move forward with some things based on the recommendation from your superintendent. And then, once the board makes a decision to move ahead, then deciding what that looks like. We start with the administration and then we would have those conversations. But you really want to start with internal PD so that you have a consistent message and look at what's here. You may have some really talented people who are doing this well. It's very nice to be able to create lab classrooms, to find teachers who are doing some of this work and then inviting other teachers to go in when they can do it in their own district. You know, sometimes we isolate as, you know, individual teachers, even though you're a whole district, but to be able to visit each other's classrooms, or have them each create something and let others go in and showcase and we can have the discussion, that's the best practice. So there are many ways of doing it, and you build on it over time.
Any other questions? I did have one question, in terms of the timeline, and I know maybe Christine might want to ask that question later as well, but I think the question that came up was related to the like how long it takes to really roll the program out. And you provide a lot of details in your timeline, but I think I don't know, maybe better for Zanthi to explain in terms of like budgetary impacts and how rolling out a gifted and talented program, like why it takes, you know, a year and a half to roll the program out. I mean, I think I have a good understanding of why, but just for the public's understanding, if you could maybe go over like budget timelines and implementation of, you know, PD, potential staff, et cetera.
Right. So the biggest thing is professional development and teacher buy-in and parent understanding as well, right? We want to make sure that we have kind of all of our ducks in a row before we implement a new program, which is why we can't just throw a program together and have a pull-out fourth grade resource GNT program for September. We really want to take our time. We want to establish a committee where people are really understanding, because if we're going to have to take a deep dive into our assessments to make sure that our assessments are giving us the information that we need to be able to identify and create a matrix with multiple measures, to give us a strong identification process, and then also articulating that process to the staff, to the families, to the community, and having people take ownership of this. Along that work would also be training the staff in what enrichment looks like in the classroom, what gifted and talented actually means, and what behaviors we see with students that are identified as gifted. That takes time and that takes work, right? We have 4 PD days in the school year. So that's 4 times to do this work on top of all the other work that is required of us. And we do have opportunities to bring in staff developers throughout the school years, but we also want to make sure that our teachers are in their classes. So there's a lot of planning that goes into a rollout. We've also, given the strategic plan and the discussions we've had around gifted and talented education, as we've made budget decisions this past school year, we've kept GNT and our future of the program in mind as we've made some decisions regarding our budget and staffing going into the next school year. You'll see too, like prepping in the first column, we've already taken steps to move towards a program, right? We've already started, first of all, we started with this audit. Our principals are looking at how to incorporate a win period. So next year will be also time for for teachers to understand how to use a win period. How to differentiate during that win period. We've also, updating our global citizens curriculum, like that, all of that is part of the bigger scope to get us to that 26-27 school year. If things move well and move fast, that doesn't mean that we can't have pilot programs going on in the spring of next school year, right? This is the timeline that felt realistic to us, to be able to take the next school year to really purposefully make decisions on what this program will look like and then implement for the 26-27 school year. But again, if everything goes well and we can smooth sail our way through and establish everything we need to establish, then, why stop and not pilot in the spring and go from there?
Really, I guess, Don, in your experience with other school boards, I mean, with the timeline this long, it's a year and a half. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, not a very long time, but with board members changing year to year, I imagine this would be like a goal that we would assign to the superintendent so that we can have something to track and make sure that it carries on year to year.
So I would establish a district goal for next year. So this summer, I would establish, or in the spring, I don't know when you set your goals for district goals, but I would establish a gifted and talented goal. So you already have one, it would be the second step. And then, but I would have it more detailed, that I would have the action plan that goes with it. So what are the steps throughout the year? who's involved and what is the monetary commitment. So the commitment next year would really be the professional development. But this way, if it's clearly spelled out, everyone who's involved knows what the timeline is. They know what's expected of them. And then you're committed as a team. You're working as a unit. Differentiation is part of the requirement when we talk about the law. So that will happen next year. Like, we'll ensure that if there are teachers who are struggling with differentiating to meet the needs of their gifted learners, that was part of what I took away just hearing and listening to what you were saying. And that's what Xanthe just said, like, it may not, sometimes you're differentiating PD also based on the needs. And we'd have to look at the data. There may be classes where sometimes you have an unusually, population, a high class, a group of learners, and maybe another class has one student, because if we do look at that data and we look at students who are exceeding standards and they're showing that they are advanced proficient, require that, then maybe we have some small group and we flex group during that win period. Those are things that we can pilot and try along the way, so that we're making progress and making gains. The most important thing is our students. So we're never compromising student outcomes. You want to optimize the learning experience for every student. So the work that we're doing is student-centered. For all of us, like, you've committed to a goal. I did an audit. If I'm working with your teachers, this is my livelihood. So of course I'm going to make sure that the professional development is meeting all the needs and that you have all those bells and whistles. But at the end of the day, if your students aren't embracing it and we don't identify those kids and we don't go in and see how it's manifesting with them, and we're going to know from our parents, because they go home, they talk about it, they bring their work home. One thing I saw in a district I was working in this year, I had a parent write, she said she's a professional speech writer. She was in DC, and she said, I can't tell you who, but her third grader was recording and practicing at home. And that was something new. And making a speech and working on eye contact and elocution. And, I had a conversation with her. I said, my first board meeting, I watched the tape back and I started every sentence with so or Those are skills. So for kids to watch back and record, those are life skills that build confidence and character and practice. That's something anyone could do. That's part of the enrichment and creating those opportunities. And maybe for some, it's getting up and reading a slide. And for others, it's getting up and having a talk. It can look very different, but that's the work that I would prioritize next year. And then visiting the classrooms, we talked about what does it look like? And the administrators would be able to give us that feedback. They're doing walkthroughs and they're setting an expectation. You'll get the greatest gains next year from that.
Thank you. And in terms of next steps then, now that the audit is essentially complete, is your involvement done at this point? Is everything transferred to? Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
As long as Donna is willing to support us, we do appreciate having a staff developer. And, my dissertation is on professional development and the impacts of long sustainable professional development. And one thing is having a consistent consultant working with staff. So my hope is that we can work with Donna next year to bring her in to do the administrator training, to work with our staff, to help coach our committees and help kind of guide that work forward. Because this is her focus. My focus is on everything else, where she can really target and be that strong support system for our community.
Thank you. Any other board questions?
The final, one final recommendation was, we talked about, at some point I would set up a dedicated email for gifted and talented at Leonia School, just so that any parent messages, or parents obviously who aren't here tonight, they all go to one place, and then we could track them over time instead of going to a board member or an administrator, because eventually we could create an FAQ and we'd add that to the website. If one person has a question, many people probably have it. And then you just add to it over time.
Great idea. So if there's no other board questions, I'd like to open it up to the public for any questions. Oh, can you provide your name and address before you provide your question?
My name is Jin Park. My address is 171 Highwood Avenue. And thank you very much for your presentation, and I hope you can work with us next year.
Thank you.
We have kids in our elementary school, and we have younger kids, and for the fourth grade and up, it's easier to identify gifted children, like accelerated math, music, or something like that. But for the younger kids, I want to hear more about the identification, and like there will be teachers and psychologists or who will identify if the teacher or parents identify by
Yeah.
themselves.
Well, the district has an obligation to identify students at all levels, beginning in kindergarten. You have benchmark assessments that are in place. There are a number of ways that they can be identified. You have math benchmarks, you have reading benchmarks. One of the recommendations that I made was to add a cognitive skills assessment. We have achievement tests, but we don't have aptitude tests. The recommendation for that is always to start that in second grade because it gives you a bigger picture. And sometimes there's students who don't perform, maybe they don't have the maturity at that level, but they have the cognitive abilities, and it's just tapping into their aptitude and learning how then to engage them and knowing that they're capable. You can't always see it. But again, yes, there is a responsibility to differentiate and set up an individualized learning plan, similar to an IEP. So a teacher would know, if they have 20 students in their class, maybe, so statistically, 3 to 5% of students, of the population in general, is gifted. That's statistics. Best practice for a district is usually if you were going to establish a pull-out program at some point, usually identify between 9 and 11%. That's best practice because you're looking at kids holistically. You're looking math and ELA. They may score higher in one area, but you're not going to have a dedicated pull-out person for such a small group, and you would be underserving your student population. But you would be looking at them independently for reading and for math, and then interests. They may be artistically talented, musically inclined, so we would work with all the instructional staff. And maybe, over time, we put in some clubs or opportunities where for a few weeks at a time, they can go during their lunch and, have advanced G&T art. Those are things you can build over time. But again, it's looking creatively at staffing and setting something up that's manageable and sustainable, because you can't put it out and then take it away. So once you start it, you want to make sure you have the resources to continue with it.
I see. And will they be in the same class, or will they?
No. So best practice is to have heterogeneous groups because kids emerge at different times. Very often you see students who, are truly gifted and performing at a much higher level in second grade than their peers. You have other kids who in fourth grade suddenly just mature and grow, and they're performing very differently than they did younger. A lot of times it's just patience, maturity. You see boys mature later. So heterogeneous groups, and again, just having all that data, you have all that in place, having those conversations, and putting an equal emphasis on students who need intervention, reinforcement, practice, who should be just enriched to enhance the overall experience, and students who need to be accelerated.
Hi, my name is Hilda Kim. I live in 248 Glenwood Avenue. So my son is second grade, and we came ACS his first grade. So what happened was we went to Dr. Martinez, and then I brought in his cognitive test result. And what happened is she did not mention about any of this program, and then we just skipped his grade. So he didn't go to kindergarten here. He just went straight to the first grade. And I didn't know about any of this program. And then he's supposed to be gifted, by a psychologist that he evaluated, but he's just a little silly boy in the class. And then he's not really, I cannot tell, he's not really accelerated in his academically. He just, he feel bored. And then I show all of his test results to every teacher in his class, but they don't think he's gifted. And he said, oh, okay. I don't think they really understand those tests mean, So he's just a little boy, just a silly boy. He's just, fooling around in the classroom. That's how, have his class, live like here.
Well, with training and by looking at all of that data and and providing different educational experiences because there are ways to elevate skills and tap into them where students who are a little more active, maybe more engaged, their
Right.
games and things, then you would see a change. And that is something that we have planned
So-
for and discussed.
So what happened, so my question is when I present his test result, right, when I came to ACS, and they supposed to like look at the test or keep us up informed any those kind of program they have, so I don't have to skip his grade. So what happened when we skipped his grade, he's okay with his academic level, just average student, but he's more younger side with his peers. So he's not really, like very mature, especially his boy. So I felt like, and I kind of like misinformed by school. That's how I feel at this moment.
I think that's an important conversation to have with the teacher. And when you have, now it's the end of the year, but when you have a new teacher next year, and give them an opportunity to share that information when you have parent-teacher conferences or in the beginning of the year, request a time to speak, and this way they'll have a better understanding from the start of how your child learns. And there are surveys and things that we can give to the parents and students to learn more about them. And those are things that maybe we'll need to infuse and embed. Those are things I can't answer for you, but the
Right.
teacher probably could at this point.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
Donna, thank you for trying to answer that. I don't want to, I'd like to try to, I appreciate your concerns for your son. I would like to try to keep the line of questioning more geared towards the overall curriculum. If you have, it sounds like you definitely had some concerns for your son, things that came up. That would be more of a question to speak with either the principal or the superintendent.
Actually, my question was when I present, I don't know really who I can really speak about it, and also when I
The
present,
principal.
I was not informed.
Okay.
And then if I told them go to this person or which department, and I was not informed anything. That was my most concern.
Understood. I
I
apologize
don't think
that you
I'm
experienced that.
I'm the only parent have this kind of question, and it's not very approachable, to contact the
Yeah.
department. That's my question.
So when there's issues with with communication, typically we always ask parents that, to start with the closest source. If it's in the classroom, then to start with the teacher. If things don't work out there, then you ask to go to the principal. If things don't work with the principal, then you work up to your superintendent's office. And then ultimately, the last option is really with the board. But we hope that it never really comes to that. And it actually
Right.
is very rare that it comes to that. But that's the process. And I apologize that you experienced that before, but that's the chain of communication. So start with the teacher, and then the principal, and then the superintendent, and then the board.
Okay.
Christian Hudson, 316 Moore Avenue. Thank you very much for doing this, and thank you to the board as well as to Dr. and your administration. This was a long time coming, and we really appreciate the initiating the process. I think it's Justin. Is that your name? I can't see your card. Yeah, you're Joseph. Oh, thank you. All of us are here representing ACS. So when you say 4, 5, 6 is really where it starts, I think you're going to find the community is really behind ACS being a significant issue at this point in time. I know. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Awesome. And Ms. Choi, the actual original law was passed in 2004. So it's a strengthening because schools didn't do it. So they passed a new law saying, no, we really meant it this time because nobody was doing it. So the law has actually been on the books for over 20 years. Absolutely. No. Dan, thank you very much, because I think you hit on what I think is the key point here, which is next steps, is defining the who, the what, the how, and how much, right? And putting that plan into action. And it sounds like, Doctor, you're already thinking about that as to who's going to do the next thing. Because what we have here is a very high-level roadmap as opposed to a detailed action plan. Who's responsible for the next step? What is that next step? What does that deliverable look like? And how can we begin to, as parents, again, getting back to what my wife said, be transparent, right? Because I do think at ACS, there was a lack of transparency. There was a lot of misinformation. I would be very careful with what you put up on that website, because the whole idea of identification, notification, appeal process, you're going to find a lot of that wasn't really there. Yes, teachers have a way to identify kids. And you're right, we probably passed legal muster, but be very careful about, because the law is also very specific about the other pieces as well. So in terms of like making sure we're transparent on the website now, we might be better off kicking that can down the road until we have the next program in place. I don't want to look backwards. I just want to look forwards. You also blended oftentimes between gifted and talented, enrichment, and accelerated. And those are three very different things. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Gifted and talented is a very defined, structured, identified set of students, 3 to 5%. Do we know how many are in Leonia right now? How many kids are identified? Since we have an identification program, is there a number right now that we have in Leonia?
Off the top of my head, I do not have it, but if
Okay.
I could find it and
All
get
right,
back
I was
to
just
you.
curious.
Sure.
If you knew it. It's
Off
irrelevant
the top
to
of
me.
my head, no, I do
All
not
right,
know.
I was just curious. But whereas enrichment, I agree, it should be available to anybody who wants it. And accelerated means that just because I'm in second grade doing third grade math doesn't mean I'm G&T. It doesn't mean I'm gifted and talented. It means I'm accelerated. Okay, gifted and talented, you need to define kind of what that looks like. And again, getting back to your point about what does the identification process looks like. And if you're going to rely on a teacher to be like, that's gifted, that's a qualitative assessment as opposed to a quantitative assessment. And I do believe, and I think you mentioned this as well, that the assessment should involve both, right? It's not just about how they look relative to their peers. It's also about what those tests look like administrated by somebody who knows what they're doing. As I tell my wife all the time, I don't have the question, I have all the questions. I'm so sorry about this. Right. Are the survey results available?
The survey results, yes. No, they can be provided to the board, and it's up to the board to make them available.
Well, I mean, I could file a Freedom of Information Act and that would be available, right?
You could have that.
So, will the board receive?
sorry, I'm
Will
just
the board
consulting.
receive the actual survey results?
I mean, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah,
We can get the
so,
survey
they're
results.
Cool. And
there
if you could make
Google-
those available, that'd be great. And if not, then I can file for it.
We'll review it with the education committee. It's the concern is just that there are, private responses, but I mean,
Well, the summarization, at least X number of people responded A, X number
Oh,
of people
yes.
responded B, right?
those statistics, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Excellent.
Oh, so do you want me to compile statistics for, you want specific?
We can talk about what that
Sure.
information will look like at another time.
Sure.
That's more of a board and education committee conversation with you, Donna.
So, I mean, again, I'll close with, my hope is that as you begin to work out what that plan does look like and what those next steps are, that there isn't another session with the parents and administrators. And, I think that the more transparency we have up front, that's how you begin to build trust again. That's how you begin to kind of like engage with the community, is like, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it. And I think the board had a great example of doing it with the 3-year plan, right? The sessions that you guys held, 5-year plan, sorry, you're right. The way I think about it is anything past 3 years never is going to happen anyway. So we've joked about that. But you have that model where you had 3 sessions, you had a number of, ongoing communications with the public about what you were thinking, why you were thinking it. And so I just encourage you to think about this in the same way. That's it.
Just to go back to the timeline and all of that, and I guess my question wasn't really about like how realistic is it. I was curious about the board's sort of take on the timeline and whether it seemed like reasonable. And I think, I've also worked in a school system to know that things take time. Like, I really appreciate that. I think what I'm concerned about is that this timeline, which is chock full of a lot of things, is going to be a black box that parents only get like a little sneak peek into every so often. So again, sort of like emphasizing whether it's at the committee level, whether it's even coming out of this meeting and having more information from the audit results, having like very clear communication so that it's shared more broadly with parents and that questions are like solicited and answered. Like that kind of interaction, I think, is going to be really important so that this timeline doesn't feel like it's just sort of like trucking along in a way that suddenly after a year we're like, whoa, what just happened? I mean, if anything, then like that's going to feel too fast. We want this process to be really informative to everyone that it's going to impact as it's happening. And so, like, I just really want to emphasize that piece. And I think the coordinator, where, you know, I had asked earlier, like, who was that and how does that work? Like, it may seem like a trivial point, but if we're going to have a concerted effort to work on something, there should be someone very clearly designated to focus on it. And I really commend Dr. Karamanos for always being open to like my emails, my questions, everything, having the time to sit with me. But she is way too overstressed, especially in this moment in time, doing 2 jobs at once and everything else. Like, we need someone who can really carry the torch. I think it's great to have a consultant, but we need someone embedded in the school district who's going to be the point person, the person of record, who's going to help coordinate and really represent the work that's going on. So I feel like if nothing else, that might be one immediate takeaway that the board, you know, if you could discuss that, figure out who it is, and then discuss how to share that. An email address is great, but who's answering those emails? Like, that's another piece of this, just in terms of taking responsibility and actually being able to help focus the conversation, I think, in the most productive way. I also, you know, I really appreciate that, yes, differentiation is happening. Like, that's a big part of where the passion, I think, from the community comes from, is that this is a school district that believes in all different kinds of learners and different ways to meet people where they are. It's the hardest thing about public schools, to think about the community as a whole and focus on individual needs, whether they're, you know, remedial and or high flying. Like, there's a big range there. And I think when it comes to gifted and talented students, as my husband's saying, and I think Mr. Park was also saying, I think we want to avoid it all starting to blend together. As much as I believe that all boats rise with the tide, and like that's a big part of what we want to see, because the level of education at Leonia will get better with all of this work, there's also a very clear subset of students, and we need to be clear with everyone about who they are, how it is that we're finding them, how it is that we're serving them. And I think that there's still a certain level of like ambiguity, murkiness in that, that isn't going to serve us if we just keep saying like, well, we're doing pieces of it and it's all kind of there. We just have to, and like rebranding to me is the surface treatment. Like, we need to actually define the backbone of the program in a way that's much more fundamental. It's not just about like, what are we going to call this? But it's like, what is the this that we're even talking about? There's still some really deep work there that I think needs to be done. And again, I would love to have more conversations like this. I so appreciate the length of this conversation to begin with, knowing how long the rest of your evenings will be to get through the rest of the agenda as well. So thank you. But if we could try and find more opportunities to keep this conversation going, I just think it behooves us all to do that.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So first, Donna, thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for coming. Like, keep coming, keep, you know, sort of making this a priority. You know, I've been on the board for 6 years, and as long as I've been on the education committee, this has been a huge priority, and we've been pushing for gifted and talented opportunities, in particular at ACS, because the program was much less defined than in the middle school and the high school, as you mentioned. Even before COVID, we had several presentations from ACS administration, you know, promising us that differentiation was happening, that there's a global citizens curriculum. I would say that differentiation happens sometimes in some classrooms and less in others, and that has to do, there's a lot of different factors that affect whether that happens, and that's been my personal experience. You know, we've had a lot of setbacks. Like, if you think about COVID, our priority was, right, and this strengthening of this law came in January of 2020, and then in March of 2020, we closed the schools, right? So we had a lot of setbacks. Like, how do we even get the kids back in school? And then what do we do with the learning loss? We've had, you know, changes in our in our central office, right? Like we've had several superintendents, and Dr. Karamanos has had to step in now twice, right? And so that impedes that forward momentum. And that's not to say like we shouldn't do it. It's just to explain like why it might not be as fast as like we'd all very much like it to be, for the benefit of all of our kids. I'll give an example. I think last year we funded math curriculum writers, right, to create projects that teachers could use as part of a toolkit for kind of more advanced learners. It's probably similar to differentiation, sometimes gets used and sometimes doesn't, and so we need to really work more on that. And I think Dr. Karamanos is incredibly supportive of the efforts, and we're gonna try to keep kind of, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast, and we're going to keep trying to plug away at it. Like as long as I'm on the education committee, it's going to continue to be a priority of mine.
Thank you very much. Donna, thank you very much for the presentation, and to the public for all your comments. We really appreciate them. Look forward to the next steps. So I think we'll move on.
May I just make one final comment?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that an audit is the first step, and typically you put everything out there, and in a perfect world you would hire a teacher who would come in and be the coordinator and set up a program, but you're looking at an ecosystem where you're trying to balance it all out. And so the next steps would be for the administration, for the board to say where do we want to take action. And again, there are board meetings, monthly meetings, and it takes time. But I applaud everyone for the commitment to the work, and through reading the strategic plan and the conversations with your superintendent, with your acting superintendent, it's obvious that it's work that you're committed to. I wouldn't be here. And just in terms of the presentation, I have to keep it real in terms of you don't want to set up an expectation that's not going to be met. And knowing that you have, how many teachers? How many teachers do you have? Yeah, so there's a whole family involved and getting everyone on board. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your involvement. It's obviously a very smart community, eloquent speaker, so I am sure that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and I hope to have the opportunity to continue the conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we do have another public presentation on ethics for the board that'll be presented by our board attorney, Mr. Lapiro.
It's very exciting.
Okay, now it's on, right? Okay. It will hopefully be interesting in a different way. But I will tell you, when I hear a presentation like that, it makes me think maybe I should stop being a lawyer and be an educator. But my my coworkers and wife would kill me if I did that, so I will continue to be a lawyer. So good to go. And I will do the abbreviated version of this presentation. You all have it. You still have copies of the various things. Perfect. Okay, great. I've given this presentation a number of times during the year. Originally, we were going to do February 11th, but a couple of things happened since then, so we got moved to today. The one thing I will also say is that, having the privilege of coming to these meetings for many years, I can tell you that, and I go to a lot of other boards of ed, but I can tell you that this board probably needs this training the least, because I think this board really understands what it is to be a board member, what the role of the board is, and how to comply with the School Ethics Act. So, just as a general overview, we'll talk about what the powers and duties of the board are. The reason we talk about that is because I think there are a lot of misconceptions in the public, not necessarily here, but in other places, as to what the board does, right? So, what is a Board of Education? You are a public body that oversees a public school district. You get your various abilities and powers and duties through the statute. 18A11-1 specifically says you're required to enforce the rules of the New Jersey State Board of Ed. We know that. Make, amend, and repeal rules for the operation of the school district, for the management of the school district. And this is a general catch-all to perform all acts and do all things consistent with the law for the lawful and proper conduct, equipment, and maintenance of the district. What does that mean? What do? The boards are required to do a variety of things. You have to approve curriculum. You have to adopt a budget to make sure that you are providing for that thorough and efficient education as you're required to do, not only under New Jersey state law, but under the Constitution of New Jersey. You have to hire, and when I say hire, you approve the hiring of the necessary certified personnel to educate the district students. Of course, as you know, the superintendent makes those recommendations to you, and then you approve those or not. But, here it's always been approval, and develop policies for the management of the school district. And policies are important because you're going to hear later in this presentation, the role of the board is oversight, policy making, planning, and appraisal, not running or administering the school district. Sometimes members of the public don't quite know that, but that is an important consideration, because if you are involved as a board member in running or operating the school district, that is going to put you squarely in conflict with the School Ethics Act, which says you shall not do that. So none of these things are action that the board takes alone. The superintendent of schools makes various recommendations to the board, and recommendation, the superintendent of schools, that one is a little Irish, like a leprechaun there, but of the superintendent of schools, perhaps, proofreading. But that's what happens. When do you act at public meetings such as this? You do have a variety of committees, and you have committee reports that are read out at every meeting. Those committees are very important. They provide recommendations to the board, but ultimately the board acts as a whole. You have to have a quorum. Your meetings have to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act, which of course they do. Committees are less than a quorum, and therefore they make recommendations to the full board, then the full board votes on those. One thing that I always say, this isn't really an issue here, and I haven't really seen it in a lot of our school districts, but always be careful with emails and text messages. In theory, if you are having, like, especially text message chains, group chats, right? Those are the bane of my existence when I'm at work, and I get like 70 or 80, important, semi-important messages. And then I look and, 75 of them are from my family talking about like what's for dinner. I can't stand group messages, but don't do it because they would also violate the Open Public Meetings Act. If you're having communications going back and forth throughout the day, you're basically having a meeting, right? So oftentimes, board members, you may have seen too, sometimes you'll get an email from the board president. I know that's happened in the past, where it says, I'm sending you this as a point of information. Please do not reply all. If you have a question, please talk to me separately. That's fine. But we don't want to do that. The reason is because you can only operate at a public board meeting, and you operate as a unit, not individual members. You may all have your individual opinions about what should or shouldn't be done, but in the end, the board acts as a single unit as a whole. And we do this here pretty typically, but to preserve decorum and to make sure that you express a single consistent position. The president alone speaks on the board's behalf. President, of course, can always, ask another board member to speak. That's common, but in terms of the official position, that typically comes from the board president. Now, the board and the administration, this we always put in all of our presentations. It's not really an issue here, but we always bring it up. The board's direct responsibilities are to make policies, develop plans, evaluate outcomes. You all do that here. We've done that for a long time. It's not to manage day-to-day operations, right? The School Ethics Act, which was enacted maybe like 40 years ago or so, maybe 45 years ago, ensures that, or it sets forth two things, like prohibited acts section, but also the School Board Member Code of Ethics. In the School Board Member Code of Ethics, one of the things it says is that board members are not to administer the schools, but to see that they are well run. That's critical. That's probably, to me, that kind of embodies what Board of Ed members are required to do. You have a bylaw that specifically addresses it, and it's not surprising. It mirrors what the School Ethics Act says. No board member, by virtue of his or her office, shall exercise any administrative responsibility with respect to the operation of the school district, or as an individual, command the services of any school district employee. You don't have all access to the schools because you're a board member. You can't just say, I want to go visit the schools today. You are a school visitor. You have policies about school visitors. You comply with those policies just like any other member of the public. So What you do is you hire individuals to run the school district. And so if we think about it in the traditional corporate structure, if you are a large organization, your superintendent is your CEO. The superintendent runs the school district, keeps the board informed, makes recommendations. Your business administrator is your CFO, overseeing business maintenance, the custodian, so forth and so on, purchasing agent, all of those different things. The board oversees all of that. Again, not an issue here, but the relationship between the board and the administration is cooperative, not adversarial. If there are issues with the administration, always ensure that those are being discussed in the appropriate venue. You do have one thing that you have to do also is when it comes to community complaints, sometimes that happens, right? You might be like on the soccer field or wherever you are, and some people come up to you and say, hey, can you take care of this? We have this problem at whatever school it may be. And, you all volunteer to be part of the board. You want to be helpful and responsive to your constituents. And we always want to say, we'll take care of that. Well, what I want you to say is not, I'll take care of that or we'll take care of that. What I want you to say is, I'm going to refer that to the superintendent, who is going to reach out to you or may have someone else reach out to you to ensure that this gets done, to ensure that what you're complaining about is addressed in whatever fashion is appropriate. You have to refer matters not only by Law 142, but also the School Ethics Act says you must refer matters to the superintendent. The board can only act at a public meeting after there's some kind of a failure of an administrative solution. That's when it comes to the board's level. And that's consistent with the chain of command, always trying to make sure things are resolved at the lowest possible level. One of the things that you do have to agree to when you get sworn in as a board member, the Code of Ethics talks about, I will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. So what that means is that when we have criticisms of school personnel or whatever it is, those are done in the appropriate venue, which is going to be executive session. If we're talking about employees, we need to be careful what we say about employees. It could violate their privacy rights. It could undermine the superintendent if there's public criticism about that. So we have to be very careful about that. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the superintendent says, but we have to be careful where we express that. And we want to make sure that we're not undermining the superintendent, because that in and of itself is going to be a violation of the School Ethics Act. Again, this is a very general comment that really has not ever happened here. I've been coming to board meetings for 10, 15 years at least, and I have not seen that. So again, we talked about this. This is kind of redundant, but board members on their own, no supervisory authority. The supervisory authority comes from the superintendent. The only person actually that you technically supervise or evaluate is the superintendent. It's also the only person that you hire. Technically, you're approving hires, but your superintendent is hiring everybody else in the entire school district and presents that to you for approval. Confidentiality, I think we all know this, but there are certain things that we have to keep confidential. I know that I don't know that this is an issue here, of course, but there are other places where it's difficult. It's especially smaller communities. There's an expectation. Hey, you're on the board. What's going on? The answer, unfortunately, is guess what? I can't tell you any of that. Hey, what about this kid in so and so's class? I know you have a kid in that class too. Yeah, and you can refer that to the superintendent, and I can't have any discussions with you about that. You may know exactly what's going on, but you can't talk about it. There could be a number of things. There could be matters that are student matters, that is protected. You can't disclose that. There could be a situation with a staff member. They might ask you, why is that staff member on a leave of absence? Can't discuss it. That's a personnel matter. There may be issues with negotiations. So keep that in mind. We always have to keep that confidential. And that's one of the requirements of the Code of Ethics, which is what we're going to talk about now. So enacted in 2001. Oh, I thought it was 40 years ago. Oh, no, I'm thinking of OPMA was 40 years ago. Sorry. So the School Ethics Act 2001. So now it's almost 25 years old here. Why was it enacted? Maybe because there were some issues that happened back before 2001, and we needed to have a very delineated code of ethics explaining what board members can and can't do. The School Ethics Commission is a state agency that oversees this. There may be from time to time, it hasn't happened here in forever, but in other school districts, sometimes there are School Ethics Act complaints that are brought against board members, technically administrators too, not the Code of Ethics, but the Prohibited Acts section of the School Ethics Act applies to administrators. Any citizen could bring a code of ethics complaint or a school ethics act complaint. The School Ethics Commission hears those. They probably hear, I don't know, maybe it's about 100 a year or so. I would tell you that the overwhelming majority are dismissed because oftentimes they are not ethical violations, but they could be potentially. And so that's the enforcement mechanism that exists. So now this is the Code of Ethics, and I'm just going to read through a couple of these and give a little bit of an explanation on some of these. And I think there's about, if it's 10 or 12, I forget exactly the number, but the first one, I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Ed and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures. Okay, so just in general, what are we talking about here? It should be somewhat self-explanatory, but to give an example of what would be problematic, if we go back to 2020 or maybe even 2021, there were some school districts that were saying, well, you know what? I know that there's an executive order out there that says that kids have to wear masks or whatever, but I don't want to do that. Well, guess what? You have to, because that's the law. We can't take it upon ourselves to say we're not going to follow the law. Just like, in contrast, back in like 2020 or late 2020 or 2021 in Florida, the governor passed an executive order that said school districts can't require students to wear masks when they return to school. And there were certain school districts, I think it was like Miami-Dade County and Broward County, where Fort Lauderdale is, and maybe Palm Beach County, they said, we're not doing that. We're going to make kids wear, well, guess what? That also violated an executive order. Regardless of what we think about the executive orders or the laws, we have to abide by them. And so those school board members are no longer school board members because they didn't follow the law. So number one always is follow the law. Your lawyer and every lawyer that you will talk to loves it when people follow the law. We don't like it when people don't. B, I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual needs of all children, regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing. Self-explanatory. We do that. That's in our mission statement. I believe that's also in your various board policies, non-discriminatory. That's straightforward. C, I will confine my board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal, and I will help to frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them. Okay, so again, talking about the big picture, the board wants to make sure that the school district is well run, not to run the school. That is one of the things that drives that specific requirement. In terms of consulting with members of the public or people who will be affected by them, that comes in a variety of forms. That could be through committee meetings, that could be through public outreach, it could be when you just have a board policy that you're proposing and you have it on the agenda for a first reading and a second reading. When that happens, you are now consulting with the public. The public can come out here, they can give their thoughts. That's happened. We've heard thoughts from the public about policies. Arthur Zayat has given us a number of thoughts, very helpful. So that's the thought process there. D is I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with my fellow board members to see they're well run. That's obvious. E, I recognize that authority rests with the Board of Ed and will make no personal promises or take any private action that may compromise the board. Where we see potential violations or allegations of violations of this are things like letters to the editor or Facebook posts or whatever social media posts we're talking about now that may not tell people, oh, I'm a board member, but this is my personal opinion. This is not the board's opinion. And if we do engage in social media posts or letters to the editor, things like that, we have to disclose that as board members. You have to put that in there to make sure that there's no private action that could technically compromise the board. F, self-explanatory. I refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends. Obviously, we all know that. G, I will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which if disclosed would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I will provide accurate information and in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its school. Also self-explanatory. What are potential violations of this? Years ago, there was I think it might have been Lodi. I forget which school district it was, but I'm pretty sure it was Lodi. There was a board member who, I don't know, had a beef with the association president, and had a blog where he put all of his thoughts on the blog, and a lot of the information and thoughts were not accurate information, slanderous, I would say, with regard to the union president and other individuals. So violated a number of different provisions of the School Ethics Act, including the one about not taking private action that might compromise the board. His defense was, not successful, well, I put the disclaimer on there. Well, it doesn't matter if you put the disclaimer on there if you violate all of these other areas. So he was suspended for 6 months from serving on the Board of Education. That's one of the penalties that can happen. I should probably go back and say, if there is a violation, it's not going to happen here, but if there were a violation, the School Ethics Act can require either that the board member be reprimanded. It could recommend a censure, which is embarrassing. The board has to read basically a public censure at a board meeting. It could be suspension from the board, and in very rare instances, hasn't happened very often, but I have seen it, they could even expel a member from the board. So that could happen. The last couple, I will vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the Chief Administrative Officer. So that we know. And I guess the one thing that I would say for the members of the public, not necessarily here, but whoever may be listening, is that just to reinforce, the board doesn't hire anybody. The superintendent makes recommendations. Does the board always have to say yes to those recommendations? No, it doesn't. But the board as a whole can't say, well, I know that you recommended so-and-so, and we didn't like that person, but we want you to appoint Joe so-and-so. You can. The superintendent has to make the recommendation. If the superintendent doesn't, it's not happening. I will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties, which we basically talked about. And Jay, we also talked about, I will refer all complaints to the Chief Administrative Officer and act on the complaints at public meetings only after failure of an administrative solution. So that all goes back to trying to make sure things get resolved at the lowest possible level and also not administering the schools, right? Again, limited involvement in personnel matters. We talked about this already. Again, I said you don't have to vote yes every time there is a recommendation, but you also can't withhold your approval for hiring a candidate for arbitrary or capricious reasons, right? So you can't just say, well, we keep hiring these people from XYZ school. I don't want to do that anymore. I want someone from a different school, like from a different college. Well, that seems a little arbitrary to me, right? There could be various reasons I don't like what's on that person's resume. Okay, that's a valid reason. And in terms of board member involvement, again, not really so much of an issue here, but I've seen it in other school districts. Some places, especially for certain hires, the board members want to be involved with, like principals or things like that. That's not really best practices. That's actually something that shouldn't happen. It can happen only in very limited circumstances. If you're hiring like a high-level administrative position, and only to give basically to give some feedback to the superintendent, but you can't participate in those generally. The School Ethics Commission offers advisory opinions. If there's ever something that a board member thinks, I'm not sure if I can do this, you can request from the School Ethics Commission an advisory opinion. They will send it to you. It will be private. Some of them get published, but they're published anonymously. You don't know what the school district is or anything like that. Some of the more important ones talks about whether you can participate in negotiations if you have an aunt employed in the school district but is not a member of the union. The answer to that is no, you can't. For a variety of reasons. You can't participate in discussions. You can't vote on it. You can't even be in the room when there's a discussion about it. What if you are a professor? Do you have a conflict related to personnel, right? Well, if you're a professor and your students maybe are involved in some way, like you can't give workshops or professional development to district employees while you're a board member. I mean, it's nice that people want to volunteer, but you can imagine there might be some confusion there about whether or not you're running the school district or getting involved in personnel decisions in that nature. Interviewing personnel, we just kind of talked about. Limited circumstances, you could have a board member or two sit in on interviews, but they cannot interview the person. They don't want you to undermine the superintendent of schools. You hire a superintendent to do these things because they have the expertise to make these recommendations, and that's who makes the recommendations. The school board member should not be involved in that, generally speaking. Same thing like exit interviews. Sometimes we have scenarios where we have an exodus of people for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's a coincidence, sometimes it's not. as a board member, you can say to the superintendent, I really think that you should all be doing exit interviews and we should figure out why this is happening. There have been board members who said, well, I'm going to do the exit interviews. Guess what? They got in trouble because you can't do that. That's basically administering the school district. So that goes beyond policymaking, planning, and appraisal. And people might say, well, what if the superintendent doesn't do that? Well, guess who evaluates the superintendent? It's the board. So those are things that you can ask the superintendent to do and have an expectation that they'll get done. If a majority of the board wants to do that. Some areas where people either got in trouble or didn't get in trouble, very briefly, in Lacey Township Board of Ed, there was a board member who, while on the board, was endorsing people to run for the board. Oh, I don't know, we lost that there, but was endorsing people to run for the board while she was on the board, and basically saying, don't vote for these people who are my current board members, but vote for these other people. The way that was done, when it was done seemingly in the official capacity of a board member, as opposed to saying, I'm a private citizen and this is who I think you should vote for, that was problematic. Otherwise, that wouldn't be. That may be a short, we may have shortened the presentation totally. But let's see what happens. Yeah, that's fine. That happens. I also have it on my laptop, but I probably can't project it. Big picture perspective, which I think everyone here knows because of all of the meetings that we've been at together, is that the board is here to make sure that the priorities that you have as board members, what you think is best as a whole, as a body, for like what your priorities are, those are get reflected in your budget. They get reflected in the directions that you go on when it comes to professional development or other things like that. Like Gifted and Talented is a great example that we were talking about here today. That's meeting your responsibility as a board member to make sure that the school district is well run. You have the overall broad perspective as to how you want to see the school district run and the things that you think need to be prioritized. And then the superintendent is the person who's going to look at the nuts and bolts of all that, how that gets implemented. The board doesn't get involved in any of the implementation process in terms of the actual implementation. You just follow up and say, okay, is this process working? Did we commit enough resources to it? And your superintendent is the person who's going to give you all the feedback about that. Before we get the presentation back up, I will also, and then I know this is the presentation, so when we get back to it, we'll skip over it. Social media use with respect to board members, that's an area where people sometimes get themselves into trouble. Just remember the disclaimer number one is important. I'm also going to give some advice about, I can go through this now. Yeah, social media use, which is, and the advice I give this to teachers when I give presentation to teachers and whatnot. I have some very easy advice for social media use. If you, so we used to say, like, would you write something in an email, for example, that you would not want posted on the front page of the New York Times, right? That's kind of a dated example now. So now it's like, would you want your post to go viral? If you don't want your post to go viral, don't do it, right? Or alternatively, the other thing I say is, if you're sitting there and you're composing, whether it's an email or a social media post or anything else, and you say, oh gosh, I wonder if people are going to take this the wrong way, if they're going to be offended. You've answered your own question. Stop. Because if you had to think about it, that means the answer is yes. So when those things come in, like, look, you have an obligation or you have a responsibility that you feel that you want to communicate with the public, that's fine. Social media is one of those ways, but just be careful. Because where people often get themselves into trouble, school board members, is that they post things on social media that potentially compromises the board and constitutes private action. And that's among all the violations, that's one that's more common. So back to this in Manchester, this seems like a strange situation here, but we had a board member who was a volunteer football coach. He got appointed to the board for a brief period of time. He still stayed as a volunteer as a football coach. Technically, you can't volunteer while you're also volunteering to be on the board. The reason is because you're now engaging with other staff members, you're engaging with students. It really blurs the lines. In this particular case, even though they said that the guy violated the act, they gave no penalty whatsoever because he didn't know. It wasn't really clear. There are things that you can do. So for example, if there's no interaction with students or staff members, like building the sets for the school play that happens like off school hours and not even like in front of the students or whatever, and then you just help out, that's okay. But anything like you couldn't be the volunteer assistant play director. Now you're interacting with students, you're interacting with staff. That's going to be problematic, and there are cases that deal with that. In this is a great example of what not to do. In this particular situation, there was a school employee who had an issue with the principal and or superintendent. And so the school board member knew this person and was friends with this person. And the person said, well, can you bring this letter to all of the board members so they know what's going on here, but don't give it to the superintendent. But I want you to give it to all the board members. I mean, right away, like as we talk about, I'm starting getting more and more anxious just thinking about it, because you can't do that, right? The number one thing that board member should have done is to say, hey, listen, I feel for you. We have a personal relationship. We're friends. That's why I can't get involved. Okay, you need to refer this to the superintendent. If the problem is with the superintendent, then refer it to the board president, and they'll do whatever they need to do. But I'm not going to be part of any of that because we have this relationship. I can't be involved. And that board member not only followed through on all those things, but then also was questioning the superintendent's position. It was a mess, and that person was suspended for 60 days. Other potential problems. Someone came to a board meeting, I guess, in Mantua Township, who was a school employee somewhere else and was complaining about either the board or a board member or whatever. And this board member was aggrieved, and so he called that person's supervisor in the other school district, said, hey, I'm a member of the board, and this is what's happening, and you need to get control of your employees or whatever. You cannot do that, right? I mean, members of the public come here. They have the right to complain. That's totally fine. We can't try to silence members of the public or encourage them not to attend meetings by calling their employers. That's obviously no good. That board member was censured. Should that board member maybe have been suspended? Maybe, I think so, but that's what happened. This one is pretty straightforward, right? If you're a board member and your child has some issues in the district and has perhaps like a disciplinary record or whatever it is, you can't try to change the record and get that removed. I mean, sure, you could make requests through the appropriate channels to say, well, the law allows me to ask for things to be removed when they're no longer relevant or inaccurate, whatever. Sure, you can do all those things, but you can't throw your weight around as a board member and say, well, hey, I'm a board member. You need to take this problematic, reprimand. That's what happened, though, in Alamucci Township. In East Orange, this is like, you can kind of see maybe how this happens, but it shouldn't happen. The board member, as I recall, was voting on against the board policy that said we're only going to name schools after individuals who are deceased, and the name can't be connected with anyone who's involved in politics. This board member said, no, I don't want to do that, and I actually want to put it on motion to name one of our schools in honor of the lieutenant governor when she was the lieutenant governor before she passed away. And it just so happened that this person who was the board member served as lieutenant governor's chief of staff. Guess what? That's clearly a conflict. That is like the definition of surrendering your independent judgment to special interests or partisan groups for the personal gain of friends. I mean, you just can't do that. I don't know how that got past the smell test for that person, but somehow it did. So we talked about social media use. I mean, I think you have, if I recall correctly, I think you have a policy that specifically addresses it, but don't post anything that would violate any of the district's policies. Self-explanatory. If you do refer to your position on the board, make sure you say that I'm a board member, but this is my own personal opinion, and make sure the content is appropriate. It doesn't prohibit you from putting stuff on social media saying like, hey, here's there's a board meeting tonight, or here's the list of here's our agenda, or whatever that's fine. But other stuff kind of goes beyond that. And the other thing I would say is, which we kind of talked about in one of the other cases, mere inclusion of the disclaimer is not enough if you violate other aspects of the act. So the content of the speech is important. One of the things that I can tell you too, because I represented some school board members who had cases brought against them in another school district, they had social media accounts. They were, as private citizens, advocating for certain people to get elected to the board. Fine. They had general disclaimers on their website. They didn't have to put a disclaimer on every single post. They had general disclaimers like on the main Facebook page or whatever it was. That was fine. However, they had, like when they were running for the board, they did something like Peterson for Westwood Board of Ed or Pontillo for Westwood Board of Ed. And they never changed the name. And the School Ethics Commission said, nothing here violates the act, but you really should not keep that on there. It should be your personal page. It creates confusion. You know, people might think that these are official communications. So those are things just to be mindful of. In terms of recusal, very quickly, if you have an immediate family member or a relative who is, and that's, you know, defined as all these individuals, for some reason cousins aren't in there, but everybody else seemingly is, whether by blood, marriage, or adoption, and there is some type of employment action, if they're employed in the district, you've got to recuse yourself. That means not even participating in the discussion. Forget about not voting, but not participating in the discussion at all. Even if the person is, if it's not an automatic recusal. So you may have situations where you have a spouse who's employed in another school district, but is also, you know, covered by the NJEA. Can you participate in negotiations in that situation? The answer, generally speaking, is no. Certainly not for an immediate family member like a spouse or a dependent child or things like that. If it's an out-of-district relative and it's someone that's somewhat remote, this is where you're going to get friendly with some of your relatives maybe you haven't spoken to in a while, because when you get elected to be a board member, because if they have a leadership position or is involved in negotiations in the other district, then maybe you can't participate in negotiations. So, you know, if your nephew is an employee of a neighboring school district and, you know, negotiations are coming up and you want to participate on the negotiations committee, check to make sure that your nephew isn't on that district's negotiating team or is the grievance chairperson or some other leadership role. Those are things to just keep in mind. And there is also circumstances, whenever there's a question, I always pull up this chart and I always look at this chart and then I look at the cases as need be. But basically what you will see from this chart is that you can't participate in negotiations essentially if you are in a similar union in another school district, or if your spouse is a member of the local union or a current member of a similar union or dependent child or things of that nature. Relatives, maybe, depending upon their circumstances. You also can't vote to ratify the contract in most of these situations. However, the other thing too is if you have a spouse or maybe a dependent child who is employed in the school, or even actually any relative really, who is employed in this school district, you can't participate in any issues involving a superintendent or even a superintendent search, right? So those are things that sometimes come up just to be mindful of. Anyway, that was the short version, I think, kind of short, of the School Ethics Act. Again, like I said, we never really have any issues here. So thank you for letting me present on that. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you can just ask me at any other time too.
Just real quick, just to clarify, in terms
Yeah.
of volunteering, it has to be an actual school type entity, not not the HSA, because it's not.
Oh, no,
a
that's
official
totally
school.
fine. Yeah, in fact, there was a question about, in one of the advisory opinions, could someone be part of, I think in that particular district, it was like an educational foundation that raised money for the schools. So that person was not only the president of the Board of Ed, but also the president of the educational foundation. That's totally fine, so long as when you are acting in your role as a board member, if there's something that deals with that education foundation, you have to completely recuse yourself. Don't discuss it. Don't vote on it. You don't even be in the room when it's being discussed. That's the way that should happen. But otherwise, yes, that's totally fine. School-based clubs or athletics or things like that, that we really can't be involved. Very limited. Again, like there was one case where a guy helped out by helping someone in the school district with the band by, I don't think he drove the truck, but he unloaded and loaded the van that had the band equipment. That was fine. That was so minimal, it wasn't a big deal. But anything more than that is problematic.
Yeah, we're such a small town that the people that typically contribute are doing things in multiple locations.
That's
so.
typically what happens. Yeah, the smaller the town, the more you see that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you. Any
and
other-
I had the same thing because I volunteer. I coach a lot of kids in the town through rec programs and other, but not school-related
For rec is
programs.
fine. Yeah, no problem there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to item 2.1, student representative comments. Any comments from our student reps? Okay. So item 3, approval of consent agenda items. It's items marked with an asterisk on the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second, please? Motion, Ms. Thompson, second. Dr. Meester? Roll call, please.
Ms. Choi? Dr. Meester? Ms. Molina? Mr. Park?
Yes.
Mr. Zepka?
Yes.
Mr. Sagal? Ms. Thompson? And President Lee?
Yes.
Motion carries on consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 5, administrative reports. Dr. Yamamoto.
Okay, I will report as short as possible. Before I get into my report, though, I did want to share news with the district and anyone watching. Today, we found out that Mr. Aguirretino, who was the superintendent here many, many years ago, before my time here, he passed. Whether I think it was yesterday or the day before, he passed. So we wanted to send our deepest condolences to his family, to his loved ones. His services will be held on Thursday, and there is an article with more details. If anybody wants the article, please reach out to me. If you can't find it online, please reach out to me and I can send it your way. So we did want to share and give our sincerest condolences to his family. Okay, then moving on. Today on the agenda, it did mention that we were going to have the board and district goal update. So we did not go through the full update, which good thing we moved it because we would still be doing presentations at this point. We will do the board and district update next meeting on May 6th. On the agenda today, on the consent agenda, the board approved the revised school calendar. So for those of you that have been calling the main offices and have been dying to know when our last day of school will be, you will see that the agenda is now approved, or the calendar is now approved on the agenda. It is scheduled to go out through Parent Square tomorrow at 9 a.m. So all of the community will get the information tomorrow at 9 a.m. But for those of you that have stuck it out and are listening, and for our student reps here, I'll give you the inside scoop. June 19th will be in the morning, will be ACS moving up ceremony. And then in the afternoon will be LMS graduation. And then June 20th, we will end our school year with the last day of school being June 20th with LHS graduation. More information will come from the building principals either tomorrow or in the next few days. Then we have a few things over break. Our Humanities Academy students and our STEM Academy students had a successful trips. Our Humanities Academy went to Italy, and they traveled through Italy. They spent almost 10 days out there, or I think it's like 10 days. I think, Renee, were you on the trip? Yes. And then our STEM Academy students went to Japan, and I had the honor of chaperoning that trip. It was an amazing experience. It was phenomenal to see the students, our kids, in a completely other country with a language that most of them don't know. And just the way that they presented themselves and the way that they carried themselves was just so exemplary. Huge thank you to the teachers, Miss Kelty, who organized the Italy trip, and Mr. Linares, who organized the Japan trip, and the chaperones, all of the chaperones that took their spring break and spent time away that they could have been on a beach somewhere or, relaxing with their family, decided to go to and chaperone these trips. And let me tell you, chaperoning is work. It's a lot of work. A lot of work goes into that chaperoning. But our kids did a phenomenal job across the board. They represented Leonia so well. And a huge thank you to the parents that raise these children that come to Leonia schools, because they are phenomenal children. Our tour guide in Japan was just completely in awe at how amazing our kids are. And that credit goes to the parents and to the community here you do such a great job that makes our job easier. And then just finally, a reminder that our Limelighters Spring Musical is coming up. Opening day is Friday. So if you have not bought your tickets yet, Friday night, Saturday night, and then next week also Friday and Saturday. I will be at next Friday's show, so if you want me to save you a seat, you let me know. And that's it for me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It's Mean Girls, a movie of my generation.
Mr. Tomasevich.
Thank you, President Lee. So tonight I just have various items to kind of let the board know for some updates as well as the public. The first item relates to the application for the increase in expenditures in the proposed 25-26 budget that was approved last board meeting. So all that information has been filed with the state. So currently the district is still waiting to receive from the state for the approval, allowing the district to move forward with revising the expenditures. And that will, happen at the public hearing on May 6th. So we're working with the state and getting that approved, any additional information that's requested. The next item relates to our SREC auction, which was held on April 19th. So the district sold 477 SRECs for a total amount received about a little over $93,000. So which is over what we anticipated. Our anticipation in the budget for this school year was about a little over $85,000. So that came in over, which is a great thing. The next area relates to our EV buses. So we currently, I'm happy to report that we currently received 4 of the 7 EV buses, which has been a long process relating to getting the grant funding from the DEP, as well as securing a lease for the additional proceeds. So currently, the installation of the EV chargers are underway, and expected completion date should be in a few weeks, with the remaining of the 3 EV buses shortly following within those few weeks. So everyone, for the public, the board, be on the lookout for those EV buses. They'll be driving through the community, transporting our students, whether it's to and from school, as well as field trips, athletic events. The next item relates to the summer EBT. That is currently underway for the summer of 2025, which, to just inform the public and the board again, the summer EBT is a federal program to help communities buy food for school-aged children during the summer. Families will receive the same amount as last year, which is $120 for each eligible child. In New Jersey, summer EBT benefits will be loaded on a card. That card is mailed directly from the state, not from the district. Eligibility is based on household income levels, and that determination is either done by the state automatically through direct certification, as well as an application process that families would have to fill out. So for all families listening from home, we encourage you, if you haven't filled out an application and you think you might be eligible, to complete an application by the deadline is May 9th for this upcoming school year, and you would still, qualify if you are determined to be eligible for that $120 per child. And the last piece I just want to read as far as a statement relating to my resignation, which is on tonight's board agenda. It has been a privilege to work alongside a dedicated board, passionate educators, and a community deeply committed to the success of students, who work tirelessly to ensure that our district operates with transparency, efficiency, and integrity. I am proud of the progress that we have made together with the board, with administration, from strengthening our financial operations to financially supporting initiatives that enhance the educational experience of every student, which we see from the presentation with the gifted and talented. To the board, thank you for your trust and collaboration and leadership. To my colleagues and staff, your support and professionalism have meant a lot to me. And to the community, thank you for your engagement and the unwavering support you provide to our schools and to me personally during my tenure in Leonia. As I move onto a new opportunity, I carry with me a deep appreciation for the work we've done together and the relationships I built here. I wish continued success for the District of Leonia, and thank you again for the opportunity to serve the district. I will always hold my time with the Leonia Board of Education in high regard.
Thank you very much, Eric. And we do still have Eric for a few more months before he goes, so we'll have an opportunity to say goodbye. We do appreciate all the hard work you've done for us over the years.
Is the construction that's going on in the LHS parking lot, is that the EV chargers stuff? Okay.
Finally. Okay, so that brings us to item 6, committee reports, student representatives.
Thank you, President Lee. For tonight, we have 2 different items to report. The first one is the NJSLA is coming up next week, and AP exams through May 5th to May 16th are coming up the following week. And make sure that students are getting ready for it, and good luck on their exams. Second one is to all seniors. Congratulations on getting accepted into college. Make sure that you accept the offer by May 1st. Update your Navions and post your commitment on the Leonia Seniors Instagram account. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. That brings us to Board of Ed practices and principles. Ms. Melman's not here tonight. Is there anyone from the committee that can or has anything to share?
We met virtually last time. Everyone kind of met on their own to work on the presentation.
Thank you. Buildings and grounds, have you had any meetings?
No, we have yet to have meetings since our last board meeting, but I'd like to say I'm excited about the EV buses and the chargers. And one other thing, I know it came up, but the doors are installed at LHS.
Yes, they are installed. We can stop talking about doors. It's great. Doors and EV chargers will no longer be on our agendas, everyone. It's exciting. Yes, so there will be some student parking spots that will need to be eliminated. But Mr. Service and Mr. Calendar are working on it, and then they'll contact students directly.
Okay, education.
So we met and got a preview of the presentation that everybody saw tonight and discussed that at length and next steps. We also talked about amending the school calendar, which we approved tonight. We also spoke about potential trips to Germany and Greece next year for spring break, and those were also on the consent agenda, I believe. And the last thing I wanted to mention is we've been looking at the graduation credit requirement at the high school and aligning our requirements with the state standards. Currently, we've been at 130 credits versus 120, which is the state requirement, and something that most of our peers adhere to. So we are going to be moving in that direction.
That policy is on the agenda because that went to the policy committee next, which I'm sure Sid will then update, and that's on first reading on this agenda.
When that comes to finance and planning, that's myself. Our last meetings were actually regarding the recent special meeting that we held. We haven't met since then. Our next meeting will be the following the county's confirmation of our budget. That brings us to policy.
Right. So we met actually towards end of March and had a very productive meeting, kind of covering off over a half a dozen policy updates, many of which are now on the first reading for today. We do have some work to do to have some live discussion again on some other future policies. So we'll be scheduling that in the next few weeks, in between spring break and some of the superintendent search. We've been rather busy, but we look forward to having that meeting and then being able to see those policies that are reflected on the next board agenda.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our next agenda item. We have no new business for tonight. Public comment is the following agenda item. We're seeing no one from the public. We will move on to board comment on any non-agenda items. Any board members have any comments?
No, I would like to wish Eric the best of luck and thank him for his time here. He had it set as a high standard, and I hope whoever comes in after him, will keep it up.
We have him until July 1st, so we have time to say our goodbyes. June 17th, we're going to say our goodbyes.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is executive session for closed session. We do need to go into closed session for some discussions. And we do anticipate that to be about 45 minutes. Coming out of that, we will take action on personnel and then adjournment. So for those of you watching at home on YouTube, we will have to terminate the session. And for our student members, we'll have to ask you to leave. And I will take a motion and a second. Ms. Thompson, in a second. Second, Mr. Sagal. All in favor? Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, we are now in closed session at 9:25.
Ms. Choi, Dr. Meester, Ms. Molina, Mr. Park,
Yes.
Mr. Zepka,
Yes.
Mr. Sagal, Ms. Thompson, and President Lee.
Yes,
Motion carries on personnel.
thank you. Can I have a motion for adjournment, please? Mr. Park, second. Ms. Molina. All in favor? Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, we are adjourned at 9:53 p.m. Thank you, everyone.